Welcome back to High Gain Guitar Academy. My name is Neil, and today we're going to talk about using the entire neck, not just pieces of it, the entire guitar neck. Now, this is probably one of the most common questions I'm asked is how do you connect it all? Like, some people get stuck in just doing chords, or maybe stuck in one box up here, like doing the pentatonic scale, and they don't know how to get out of it. How do you connect the whole neck to be a master of the guitar? Well, I'm going to show you a couple tricks that I learned so I can quickly reference where I'm at and how to be creative in every area. One of the most important things you got to know is where your notes are and how to find those octaves of those notes, right? So since the guitar is largely centered around E, let's just start from E. We have a big E string, a little E string. It just makes sense to me. Let's start with open E. So we know the open string is E, and the 12th fret where the two dots are, that's going to be the octave of that note, right? Okay, great. Now we just need to know on the next string, where's our E note on the A string, right? Well, after playing guitar for many years, I know it's the 7, okay? So some of these things are going to be things you just have to memorize, okay? You have to practice and memorize it. But I'm going to show you a trick to where I really only need to memorize where my E notes are on the first few strings, and then I'm going to use an octave trick to find where those notes are on the rest of the strings. So on the A string, I know that the 7th fret is an E note. In the corresponding dot, remember your dots are going to be the same. 3 is just like 15, 5 is just like 17, 7 is just like 19, and so on. So whatever dot I'm on this lower part of the neck, I'm just going to use the same dot up here. Now you're not always going to be on a dot, but I'm just using that as an example. So 7 down here is going to be the same as 19 up here. So right away I know that if that's my E note on the A string, so is that. That's another octave of E. You can use the same logic on the D string. I know that the 2nd fret on the D is an E note, right? D, D sharp, E, okay? So the 2nd fret is just like the 14. There you go, 2 octaves of E on that string. And you use the same logic for every string, okay? That's one way you could find all of any particular note on the guitar. You can apply it to any note. Let's say I did A note, right? I would find an A on the big E string. That's gonna be the 5th fret. And then up here again, at the 17, open A. Then the 12, of course, on the D string, it's the 7th fret. And then the 19, there you go, and you can just keep on with that. Now, another trick I like to use is this octave trick. So, if I'm holding, let's say, the 3 of the big E string, to find an octave close by without having to go to the other side of the neck, I can go down 2 strings and up 2 frets. Okay, so now I've got the 3 of the E and the 5 of the D. 2 strings down, 2 frets up. Now that works for the E string and the A string. If I'm on the A string, on the 3rd fret, for example, 2 strings down, 2 frets up. Octaves. Now you could find another set of octaves. Let's go back to the E string. I've got 3 of the E and 5 of the D. Now I'm going to put my pointer on the 5 of the D right there and go 2 strings down and 3 frets up, okay? When you include the B string, there's a 1 fret difference. That's just how guitars tune. It is what it is. So from the D string, 2 strings down, 3 frets up. Right? Now I've got that next octave. You can do the same thing from the A string. Okay, so now I've referenced a bunch of octaves really close by in one area. You can also do the same up high. So now we're expanding on our knowledge of octaves. The next thing that you want to be able to do is incorporate bar chords, okay? Now, the reason I'm putting bar chords before scales is because the chord is kind of the conglomeration of all the notes you need in one place, right? I mean, the chord kind of says it all, where the scale will sort of like elaborate on the chord. So, major bar chords and minor bar chords, knowing where all those are and the shapes of doing those on the E and the A string. I always say the E and the A specifically because past that, you're not really doing bar chords, you know, with your root note from the D string very often. It's mostly the E and the A, okay? So if you know your bar chord, major shapes on the E string, and then your minor shapes, right? And then let's say I go to the A string, major shape, minor shape. We've gone over those shapes in another video. I don't need to spell them out for you here, but knowing those is very important. So no matter where I am, let's say I'm in the key of B. I can start down here on the A string, do one up here on the E string, back to the A string, and then it's really hard to do chords up this high, but there's another one on the E string. Can't really squeeze my big hands in there, but you get the idea. So that right there gives me a lot of access to using chords all over the neck. If I'm playing a song in E, and then I go to play a lead up here, I don't want to have to jump way back down here for the rhythm right away sometimes. So I might use this bar chord E that's right next to where I was playing a solo, right? Just saying. And let's say I go up higher. Now I'm kind of where that chord is. So knowing where your bar chords are and relating them to your scales and solos, that's really going to be how we master using the neck. Now let's talk about that, using scales in this context, right? So if I know, let's just use the pentatonic scale for example, okay? Just because it's such a widely used scale. If I know this is a G note on the 3 of the big E, that's great. Now the next octave of that would be way up here on the E, but there's gotta be someplace in between here. So I would urge you all to learn a version of, let's say any scale, but in this instance, the pentatonic. Learn a version that starts on the E and starts on the A. Then you have complete access to the neck. So here's the pentatonic on the E string. Then here it is on the A string. Right? So I've filled in this middle area now. And then you can move up from there, right? So you just have another octave. So that's really probably the most important piece of advice I can give you on using the entire guitar neck, is learning your chords and scales in both the low and high octaves on the E and on the A string, because that fills in all the gaps. You've got low, low mid, high mid, and high. You've just got all 4 areas, okay? That's kind of how I like to look at the guitar neck, as sort of in quadrants. I don't break it down to specific frets that separate these areas, but it's just sort of a general, you know, I'm down here, I'm up here, I'm up here, and then I'm way up high. If that makes sense. I know this isn't a super formal way of explaining it, but this is how my brain works, and maybe it'll work for your brain as well. We've talked about octaves, we've talked about bar chords, E and A string scales. Now there's one last thing I want to throw at you, and that is try using scales that are like ascending shapes, meaning instead of staying in one box, let's say I played a major scale down here in the key of G. Well, it just kind of sticks me right here in these 4 frets, right? What if I did a different shape of that scale? Exact same notes, but it's different shape. And that might allow me to climb the neck in a different way. Now, you can make up different versions of the major scale that really span a lot further. Like, check out this major scale that I use a lot. That covered a lot of ground. I went from the 3rd fret of the E all the way up here to the 15 of the little E. Like, that's over half the neck I used to do this major scale shape I came up with. So it's really just up to you to get creative with the notes and the moods that you're trying to get across. All those notes I played, while not a traditional major scale, all work in the major scale. So it's just a more creative way to climb the neck. I use a lot of what I call repositioning, where basically every time I need to get more fingers, I just bring my pointer up. So, you know, repositioning your pointer, kind of crawling up the neck that way, is a good way to cover a lot of ground. So now that we kind of know where all the areas are on the neck, that's a great way to kind of get there. Now, another thing I urge you to do, and this is the last thing I'll tell you, whatever licks you're doing down low, whatever licks you're doing up high, do the same one in both octaves. That really helps you to kind of get a better grasp of using low and high on the neck. For example, if I'm up here and I do that, I'm gonna do it down here too. That sort of thing can get you really used to jumping from high and low on the neck, and when you put that in the context of playing a guitar solo, makes it a lot more interesting than just staying in one part of the neck. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna make something up. I'm just gonna improv a little guitar solo where I use high and low parts of the neck in the key of A minor, for example, just to show you how I might use all these things we learned in the context of a song or guitar solo. So here we go. So there you go, just off the top of my head, a way that I was able to connect these scales based on knowing all my octaves, knowing a version of the scale on the E string and a version on the A string. That's kind of how my brain works when it comes to using the entire neck. And there you go, take it, love it, learn it, use it. See you next time.